If you were to add up every grain of sand on every beach in the world, it's about 7 quintillion. So Bitcoin's running at 120 quintillion calculations per second. Taking it over is beyond the reach of any government. Bitcoin is changing the global economy in a profound way that we're all waking up to right now.
Do you have any speculations yourself of who you think Satoshi is?
People in the Bitcoin community think of Craig Wright as a fool.
Let all these guys go at it. Let them just figure it out. And then 10 years later, the governments come over and they say, listen, guys, thank you so much for all your help, but now we're going to take it over.
That's a 100% losing bet. I would argue that the inspiration for Bitcoin is divine.
So you think God created Bitcoin?
It raises people's consciousness and raises their character.
Did the pandemic make a bigger case for cryptocurrency?
I don't think they realized that this was the Godzilla of money.
This crypto thing is getting a little too big. Say the government comes and hires Max Keiser.
I'll put my pinky in my mouth and say, oh, $100 million.
Let's just say the government gave you $1 billion.
Do it. Come at me, bro.
So I have with me today Max Keiser. Some call him a showman, some call him a genius, some call him a libertarian, some call him all. With that being said, Max, thanks for being a guest on Valuetainment.
Yeah, Patrick, great to be on with you. Big fan.
Good to have you on. I love when you go into your friendly, heated moments talking about Jamie Dimon or talking about your thoughts on Bitcoin. You're definitely passionate and your perspective is something to think about. So my first question for you, knowing the fact that, look, you talk a lot about Bitcoin, you're one of those unique ones that's both pro Bitcoin and pro gold and silver. The first question I'd have for you is, did the pandemic make a bigger case for cryptocurrency, or did it hurt the argument for cryptocurrency?
Well, you're right. I do like both Bitcoin and gold because they are equivalent in many ways. You could argue that Bitcoin is better than gold in many ways. And we've seen gold rally. We've seen Bitcoin rally. The US dollar looks a bit weak in here, and because of all the money being printed by the Fed, certainly. But that's true of all central banks around the world. It's a race to the bottom to see who can devalue their currency the most. And this is great for hard assets like gold, like Bitcoin.
So you're saying the pandemic actually got people thinking more about Bitcoin and cryptocurrency than before?
Well, the pandemic triggered massive money printing, and that's good for gold and good for Bitcoin. I think that we're seeing great mobilization of Generation Z and the millennials into now investing because they're getting a lot of free cash from the government. And a lot of that money is finding its way into Bitcoin via various apps like Robinhood and other apps like that. Bitcoin is very native to the millennials and Gen Z. They relate to it a lot easier than they do gold. And so all in all, it does have a positive impact. But the trend is, Patrick, has been very strong for now 11 years. So that trend is really the primary trend. And the COVID-19 pandemic is just a part of the story this year. But the fact is that these central banks have got themselves caught in a place where they have to keep printing because of the money itself is debt-based money. And so to pay the interest on the debt-based money, they have to print more debt-based money. It's a bit of a Ponzi scheme. And so that trend will continue. And so there is now a growing awareness that hard assets like gold and Bitcoin are the place to be. Central banks like Russia, China, and others have been huge buyers of gold in anticipation of that point at which fiat money really starts to lose its ability to function effectively in this economy. And so it benefits both gold and Bitcoin.
Makes sense. I guess, the one thing I'm wondering is there a way to get data to see if there are more new believers, new users coming in to buy Bitcoin? Is there a way to measure that?
Yeah, sure. You have, for example, Cash App, which is part of Square, which is part of Jack Dorsey's business empire. He has both Twitter and Square. He launched Square launched Cash App, which allowed purchases of Bitcoin less than a year ago, and now it's the biggest part of that business. They've sold hundreds of millions of dollars worth, and as a revenue generator, it's, I think, the biggest revenue part of Square's business. We've seen the users of Bitcoin around the world. I think it's now estimated to be up to 70 million users. And that number is growing. The thing about Bitcoin is that it grows like a messaging app, which is interesting because messaging apps, as you know, from the technology space, they have a period of adoption, and then they hit that hockey stick moment when suddenly it's like, wow, we've got to own this thing. And so Bitcoin, because it takes advantage of the network effect, it is a technology. It is a network technology. So you have that point when we get to the ubiquitous Bitcoin use around the world, as people realize that, hey, this really is what people say it is. And so the numbers are growing rapidly. We haven't yet hit that hockey stick growth moment yet. I think probably we'll see that pretty soon now.
Every time, I'm in the insurance business, we were talking about offline. I've been in the financial for 20 years now. Always when a new instrument comes out, it doesn't matter what it is, whether it was a CDO or whether it was every time there's these new products that come out, right? And you always go to who likes it the most, who loves it the most, what audience does that product attract, and then who hates it the most. If you were to say who hates the concept of cryptocurrency, who would you say are the ones that hate the concept of it the most?
Well, we know the detractors of Bitcoin right now would be the people who are threatened by it. So the legacy economists like Paul Krugman, Joe Stiglitz, Nouriel Roubini hate it because it challenges their models that they've been familiar with for decades. We know that banks don't like it. At first, Jamie Dimon over at JP Morgan hated it, but now the bank is open to it. He's got relationships now with Gemini in New York, which is a huge Bitcoin player, and others in the space. So JP Morgan has kind of flipped over now to the Bitcoin camp. You've got big players coming in like Paul Tudor Jones. He's one of the biggest hedge funds in the world for a long time. I remember I was following Paul Tudor Jones when I was a stockbroker in the 1980s. That's how I got my start. In 1983, I started my career as a stockbroker, was a stockbroker for 8 years on Wall Street. And Paul Tudor Jones is a huge name. And he came out recently and said that he believes we're going to see a lot more inflation now because of all this money printing. He wants to bet on gold, but he also has a big bet on Bitcoin because he says it's the fastest horse in the race. The theory being that if Bitcoin's market capitalization can start to approach that of gold, which now gold is at 8 trillion, Bitcoin's at 160 billion. So for every dollar move in gold up, you would see $25 to $30 appreciation of Bitcoin. That's what he means when he says it's the fastest horse in the race. So those are the people that like it. A lot of people started hating it. Now they like it. There was a big community in the Austrian School of Economics that at first were not open to Bitcoin. Gold bugs, hardcore gold bugs were not open to Bitcoin. But every day, more of those people switch over. They join the camp. They understand Bitcoin better, and they kind of join in and appreciate it. Obviously, one of the most famous, I guess, well-known Bitcoin bashers would be Peter Schiff. He's been, bashing Bitcoin for a long time. I've debated him on it a few times. I call him the Bitcoin pinata because, you can beat Peter Schiff with the Bitcoin stick all day long and it just keeps giving more candy, right? Because his arguments never hold up. The coin, when I first told Peter Schiff about Bitcoin, it was $10. Right now it's, $9,000. He's been wrong now for almost 10 years, and he'll be wrong for the next 10 years, the next 20 years, the next 30 years. So he's a lot of fun. We like to watch him flail about, but I think ultimately he will switch over probably because the market is telling us something, Patrick. As you know, market signals are very strong. You're in the insurance business, you're in the finance business. Market signals are extremely strong ways of communicating market reality, right? The price signal tells us what's really going on. And the price signal in Bitcoin is telling us that it's winning against all the naysayers. It's gaining market share. It is equivalent to gold, and it's winning over huge legions of fans around the world as the fiat money system is in dire straits. So the timing is perfect.
So that's interesting. You're saying that with the folks that don't like it the most, because again, that gives you perspective on why there'd be some pushback from certain areas. But then the other side is also, who has really created this? And I know when I'm saying who has really created this, we can talk about Satoshi and all these other. I'm not talking about that part. I'm talking about, is Bitcoin cryptocurrency feeding the eye, or the antithesis of the eye? Meaning, is somebody saying, hey, all of you guys, let all these guys go at it. Let them just figure it out. Let them put it all together. Let them figure out all the mistakes. Let guys screw the whole thing up. And then 5 years, 10 years later, the world government, the governments come over and take over, and they centralize them. They say, listen, guys, thank you so much for all your help, but now we're going to take it over. So is it really the people doing it, or there's some people more powerful than you and I that are behind this?
Right. So a couple of things there. First of all, the idea of taking over Bitcoin is, you have to kind of dig into that and understand what those words are implying. So to take over, we'll get to that in a second. But let's go back to kind of in a broader context here. So who created it, and why did they create it? The history of Bitcoin before the 2009 beginning of it, January 3rd of 2009, there's a 20-year history behind it of what are called the cypherpunks. And these are developers, programmers, hackers who were always trying to figure out what we call digital scarcity. And I myself have a patent on digital scarcity, US patent 5950176. It's the virtual specialist technology. That is a patent that covers digital scarcity, as well as it's the first commercial prediction market. So the prediction market industry was pretty much, I invented that in 1996. And digital scarcity is this idea that can you create assets digitally that are scarce in a world of the internet where everything is basically easily to replicate. What we know about the internet is that it's very easy to copy things. That's what makes the internet the internet. You can send emails to 10,000 people at a click of a mouse because it's easy to copy everything. Yep. And you create scarcity, digital scarcity. And so I know from experience, from my patent and my work at the Hollywood Stock Exchange, which I created in 1996, we eventually sold that to Cantor Fitzgerald in 2001. But I know from my work in this space, the difficulty it was to come up with a decentralized digital scarcity, which is what Bitcoin accomplishes. Unlike every other attempt is a centralized digital scarcity, and that's not the same thing. So that's the first point. The second point, in terms of can it be taken over? The fact is that the Bitcoin network runs at 120 quintillion calculations per second right now. To give you an idea how big a number that is, if you were to add up every grain of sand on every beach in the world, it's about 7 quintillion. So Bitcoin's running at 120 quintillion calculations per second. It's the biggest distributed computer network ever in history. And the cost of taking it over is beyond the reach of any government. And it's beyond the reach of any group of governments. There is no entity or group of entities that have the computer power or the money to attack Bitcoin in any meaningful way, which makes it indestructible, immutable, uncensorable, and unconfiscatable as well, which is an attribute that a lot of people are waking up to, because it's not the same with gold. Gold is not unconfiscatable, and certainly fiat money is not unconfiscatable either. So there is no attack vector coming from a government. There's no attack vector coming from a group of governments. And I would say that I don't see any attack vector coming from anywhere at this point. Bitcoin is on a journey to much higher prices and changing the global economy in a profound way that we're all kind of waking up to right now.
Now, you've been in the world of finance for a while, so you know the word money laundering. How easy is it to launder money through Bitcoin and cryptocurrency and blockchain?
Money laundering and criminal activity through Bitcoin is about the worst way you could launder money, because the blockchain, it's open source and transparent. So people who have tried to do criminal activities with Bitcoin get caught a lot easier. With fiat money, there is no provenance. You have no idea where it's coming from. Gold also, it's fungible in that way. You have nowhere where it's coming from. The actual statistic on criminal behavior with Bitcoin is estimated by authorities to be less than 1% of all financial crime involves Bitcoin.
Less than 1%. So you know, I've interviewed a lot of mobsters. I've interviewed a lot of folks who have been in.
But let me just jump in for a second, if I may. I don't mean to interrupt you there, Patrick, but when you talk about financial criminality and the size of financial criminality, let's remember that a bank like JP Morgan and Jamie Dimon have paid hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars in fines for their financial fraud and their financial criminality. And the number of frauds and criminal acts by banks that were settled civilly with fines, if you were to add that up, you would be aghast. And it's almost as if the business model for Wall Street banks is to keep 90 cents of every dollar they steal, and then they pay 10 cents in a fine. I mean, that's where the frauds and the crimes are taking place. That's their model.
Yeah,
that's their model.
Yeah,
that's right. Their business model is fraud.
Some of them even call that's marketing dollars, if you want to call it. But I'm not asking the question of money laundering from a point of trying to corner you or the industry of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. I'm asking it from the standpoint of, you know, when things eventually get centralized and you get people that want to come and take over, they find an in, right? They look at an angle and they say, this is how we're going to come in. So you don't worry that the blockchain world is going to attract more criminal activity and they're going to come through and try to figure out a way to launder money. You don't worry about that? Just
to be clear, there is no centralization of Bitcoin, and there is no ability to centralize. And there's no ability to centralize Bitcoin. It's a mathematical impossibility. It's like saying you're going to stop the sun from rising in the east tomorrow by stamping on the ground and crying, right? It's not going to happen.
Can you unpack that?
Because the protocol of Bitcoin is this brilliantly balanced protocol of what's called a consensus algorithm, and that all elements of it are balanced in basically what you could boil down to being game theory. The incentive for everyone involved in the network is to let everyone else involved in the network balance their incentives in such a way as to resist censorship. Because if there was a censorship involved, then the value of the coins at 150, 60, 70 billion dollars would be threatened. So there's a game theory that's baked into the Bitcoin protocol that resists any attempt to centralize it. And, you know, if there was any ability to centralize it or have influence on it in a meaningful way, we would have seen by now, after 11 years, since it does threaten all central banks and it does threaten all fiat money, we would have seen some success or hint of any success in that direction. But so far, we've seen absolutely none, because for the reasons I outlined, the cost is too high. Nobody has the money to centralize it, and nobody has the computer power to centralize it, and certainly not a group of 2-bit mobsters. They do not have the ability to centralize it. If you want to take a bunch of Wall Street banks and European banks, they don't have the money or the capital, and no government has the money or the capital. This is decentralized digital scarcity built on a protocol that was birthed in 2009 and has now been established as creating absolute scarcity, which is something not even gold can claim. You know, gold is not absolutely scarce. Gold is relatively scarce, but it's not absolutely scarce. So you have a store of value, a store of wealth distributed, demonstrating absolute scarcity that you can use as a store of value, as money available to everyone on the planet. That's why, you know, you're getting a lot of pushback from governments, you know, because they realize that this is a direct threat to the central bank model of centralized fiat money printing. But just to be clear, the point is that the way the technology is constructed, let me put it this way. The internet runs on the TCP IP protocol, and it's completely distributed. And it would be extremely difficult, bordering on nearly impossible, for one entity to centralize the internet. The internet, the virtue of the internet is that it's distributed. That's what makes it the internet. If you start to balkanize or to centralize the internet, so all parties attached to the internet have an interest in keeping the internet decentralized. If that's why it works. The same thing with Bitcoin. Everyone invested or part of the internet protocol, which is this distributed protocol like the TCP/IP internet protocol. It fosters decentralization. That's the definition of what it's all about. And so it resists centralization, and therefore I don't put that as an attack vector or a threat in any meaningful way.
Well, let me take a different angle then. Let's play a game of devil's advocate. You're familiar with Frank Abagnale, right?
Yeah.
You've seen the movie Catch Me If You Can.
Right.
So say the government comes and hires Max Keiser. They give you open check, give it a $100 million check. They say, hey, Max, we need your help. This crypto thing is getting a little too big, and we need to take control of it. We need to figure out a way to regulate it. What is the angle to take to get in there and regulate it and take control of it?
Well, like the Austin Powers movie, I'll put my pinky in my mouth and say, oh, $100 million, right? The Bitcoin network is... Are
you saying 100 million is not enough? Let's just say the government gave you $1 billion.
Well, what I'm saying is that no government has the budget for this. They don't have it. There's no government has a budget for it. Now, let me explain how this works a little bit more. So let's say the budget was $100 trillion, right? Which is the global GDP is about $70 trillion. And the stock market's worth roughly 30 trillion, corporate bond market, let's call it 10 trillion.
Okay.
So let's go big. Let's say you're going to give me $100 trillion to go after the Bitcoin protocol and Bitcoin. Well, this is what happens. The protocol sniffs out that there's a $100 trillion player that's now attempting to stage a takeover and centralization of the protocol. So two things happen. Number one, the calculations per second number starts to skyrocket, because the only way to have any impact on this protocol is by actually mining, by actually creating or doing what's called a 51% attack on the chain. So that means you go from 120 quintillion calculations a second to 200, 300, 400 quintillion calculations per second. So that means that the price, which follows the hash rate or the calculation rate, would go from the current value of approximately 9,000 per Bitcoin. It'd go to $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 per Bitcoin, heading to $1 million a Bitcoin. So the more you attack it, the higher the price goes, and the more expensive it is to attack it. That's one of the genius elements of the protocol. It actually invites people to attack it. The way that the network stays secure, and the reason the price keeps going up, is because every month or 2 months, somebody shows up and says, I'm going to attack the Bitcoin network. I'm going to be a player. I'm going to attempt to centralize it. And of course, that's exactly what it wants. It attracts that kind of interest, and that increases the calculations per second, which increases the security, which increases the price. And that price means it's drawing from the fiat world. More people are saying, wait a minute, why do I even own fiat money when I can be owning this Bitcoin and it's going up a lot? Why do I even own gold when I could be owning Bitcoin and it keeps going up a lot? So, have at it. Throw $100 trillion at it. Do it. I want to see Bitcoin go to $1 million. So, come at me, bro.
So you're saying there's no way, even if they hired the best person that knows everything about the game, even if they hired, Craig Wright, they brought anybody, and you're saying there's no way in the world to stop the momentum being created in crypto or blockchain?
Correct. It's no way. It's a first of all, you mentioned Craig Wright there. Craig Wright is a known fraud, so we should make that clear. So we shouldn't mention him in any context of a serious conversation. But the point is, the bottom line is that is what I'm saying, that it's beyond the reach of any centralized group, authority, or assemblage of money or technology to stop Bitcoin. It is now a runaway freight train. It is basically the way the protocol works in a lot of ways, Patrick, is that it has an insatiable need for energy, because all that calculative power needs energy, and Bitcoin is becoming the biggest energy user in the world. It will soon be the single greatest use case for energy, all energy in the world, because I'll give you another interesting story that's developing, because I know your background, I know you're Iranian. It's interesting that Iran is now mining Bitcoin, and because they see that they do not want to expose themselves to the US dollar, they want to escape the US dollar, and the way that the US dollar is used politically by censoring the SWIFT dollar mechanism, et cetera. You know, Iran's been sanctioned, and they do so using the dollar. So Iran has been pretty, hip to the idea that, we can actually escape the US dollar hegemony around the world by starting to get into this Bitcoin. So now what this will do is, naturally, other countries like the US or the UK will look at that and say, wait a minute, do we want Iran to potentially be the richest country in the world because they would have the biggest Bitcoin position in the world? No, we don't want that. So now we're going to get into Bitcoin mining. It'll be like when Russia launched the Sputnik satellite in the early 60s. It launched the space race, right? America said, we can't let Russia, win the space race. So then they put all their money into space exploration, and we know the story there. So now that Iran has tipped their hand and said, we're getting into Bitcoin, which is the hardest money ever known in the universe, and we could potentially have the hardest money on planet Earth and potentially be the richest country on planet Earth, these other countries will say, wait a minute, no, we're going to get into the game. So they're going to devote all of energy, budgeting, and capital to Bitcoin mining, and what I would call a hash war, or a Bitcoin mining war, which I think is what we're going to see in the next 12 to 24 months, as countries competing with each other to accumulate as much Bitcoin as possible. And then that will drive, again, the hash rate, or the calculation per second rate, higher, which will drive the price higher. So you get that price will constantly be going higher. So I think that is what more likely outcome than the outcome or the idea that somebody's going to decide that they're going to try to control Bitcoin. That's a losing bet. That's a 100% losing bet.
So let me ask you, why'd you make the comments you made about Craig Wright? I know in the past he's claimed that he's Satoshi and he's the one that owns the Genesis block, and I don't know whether he lost the private key or not. Why'd you say what you said about Craig Wright? It's
well documented now, very well in numerous sources, that his claims are bogus. And he also is behind a competitor to Bitcoin, or he's part of a competitor to Bitcoin called Bitcoin Satoshi Vision, which is an outright fraud as well. And pretty much he's been called out numerous times. He's launched several lawsuits that are all either lost or in the process of losing. And he has no basis whatsoever to make those claims. It's been shown that the claims are baseless. And the way he thinks and the way he talks and the way he conducts himself would be kind of, if you're trying to create a character of somebody who knows nothing about Bitcoin, who is the antithesis of the character and the vision behind it, it would be someone like Craig Wright. He's a fool. I mean, the people in the Bitcoin community think of Craig Wright as a fool, basically as a fool. He has no credibility whatsoever in the Bitcoin space. He's absolutely laughed at. And in a year or two from now, you won't hear, the name will be forgotten forever.
Who else has claimed that they're Satoshi outside of him?
Nobody.
Nobody's ever claimed.
That's right.
Interesting. Do you have any idea yourself? Is there anybody in the community when you talk to you say, you kind of have an idea how this whole thing, who it was, or no? It's still something that's unknown.
It's unknown, and it's better that it's unknown.
Tell me why.
Because if you have a known person attached to it, they become an attack vector, and people will attack that person, and so you don't want that. You want, who invented gold?
This is different though. Gold is different than Bitcoin though, than cryptocurrency though.
Well, how so?
How is gold created? Through what? What creates gold?
Through the creation of 13.8 billion years ago, the Big Bang, and the universe was started, and elements collapsed, and stars exploded.
Yeah, that's the point. It's not man-made. Gold is not man-made. Crypto is man-made. It's slightly different.
I would argue that the inspiration for Bitcoin is divine, and that it reflects it reflects an inner divine nature of humans. So it is similar to gold in that way. If you believe that God created everything, including gold, then you would also believe that God created Bitcoin.
So you think God created Bitcoin? Now
do you think God created gold?
I don't think man created gold.
Well, do you think God created man?
That is the agnostic position. Let's just say there is a creator, and God created man.
So, and everything in creation goes back to the creator. That would include everything.
God, I can't say God created a car. A man.
Okay, but the reason I say that is to make that position is because I realize that it's an interesting position, but it's also, the effects that Bitcoin are having on the world are quite interesting, in that it's bringing about a realignment of the way people think about themselves and about their economies and about their communities. Because, for example, Bitcoin encourages people to save money, which is different than encouraging people to spend money. Mm-hmm. It's like when, you have, I'm sure that as part of what you are doing over there at your company, and you talk to your employees and things like that, one of the ideas you want to get folks to understand is to not go too far into debt, don't overconsume, be self-sovereign, be your own person, and have inner strength and morals and values. And then those values are carried over into your work and your family and your community. And so, you can't do that with fiat money, because fiat money is inherently debt-based money. And the more they issue, the worse the economy gets. And it's extremely a poor system. Whereas gold, people who buy gold and store gold, they have a kind of a different attitude toward savings. Okay, yeah. So Bitcoin is a savings technology. Bitcoin is a savings technology that changes people in profound ways. They think differently about their communities, about themselves. It has a very positive effect. It's passive resistance. You're opting out of the fiat money system, and you're now saving Bitcoin. It's like you would save gold. And you look at the millennials and the Gen Z, and they're like, this is actually in a world with leaders are corrupt and mentors are not available, and our business establishment is run by people of dodgy character. I'm finding my inner kind of strength by saving and achieving individual sovereignty, and I'm doing it through Bitcoin. So that's why I say it has a celestial or divine quality about it, because it makes people, it raises people's consciousness and raises their character, and that's an important thing that for folks to understand, and it's part of the process of maturing, right? You have to take responsibility for yourself.
Now, I know you say that you've said you've never sold a Bitcoin before. Everything you've bought, you've kept, right? Now, that's not everybody though. The marketplace of Bitcoin and crypto has had the reputation of also attracting some dodgy people too. I mean, you can see a lot of different series and documentaries and 60 Minutes on it. But going back to Satoshi, just out of curiosity,
let me comment on that. So you dropped that, and let me comment on it. You say, you have first of all, there's Bitcoin, and then there's the crypto market. No crypto is Bitcoin. There's Bitcoin, and then there's 5,000 other failed attempts to compete with Bitcoin. There's gold, then there's pyrite, there's fake gold, right? There's attempts to be gold. Bitcoin is, there's only Bitcoin. There is no actual crypto industry. It's only Bitcoin. That's the industry. And then everything else is junk and it's not serious in any way. So I just wanted to make that point.
So do you have any speculations yourself of who you think Satoshi is, or not at all? You don't put any thought or energy into it?
Well, I know the people that were involved in the cypherpunk movement who contributed different parts to it, right? For example, in the white paper, Dr. Adam Back is mentioned. He is a cryptographer, and he has been active in developing some of the elements that went into the ultimate protocol, the ultimate creation. So he's a big part of it. Hal Finney is somebody who was a big part of it. He talked, there's some great chats that have gone on in chat rooms before the launch. And Hal Finney, he's no longer with us anymore. He died, sadly. And there's 3 or 4 other people that you could say are part of directly part of it. I think, my view is that, Patrick, in industry, in business, a lot of times you have like an industrial accident, like the creation of microwaves or penicillin or nylon, or, these things that come along or Viagra was supposed to be hypertension medicine. That's not the market for Viagra today, right?
Of course.
So, Bitcoin the purpose of Bitcoin was to solve what's called a double spend problem, or to create digital scarcity is another way to put it. And it's a very specific objective. And I don't think that people really, ultimately when it was appeared, I don't think necessarily they realized that this was the Godzilla of money, really, that it was going to challenge the global economy the way that it is, right? That's a bit of half of it was engineered, half of it, I think, was just accident. It's just a brilliantly engineered, brilliantly incentivized protocol that solves a very specific problem, but in so doing has changed the world. Wow. And I don't think that was the intention, really. I think the intention was just to solve a very specific engineering problem. And like many industrial accidents of the past, it changed the world. Something is the creation of plastic was an accident. And yet imagine our world today without plastic.
So in essence, it's an accidental currency, is what you're saying.
It's an accidental money. It's a currency. Anything can be currency, but only money can be money.
So let me ask you this. Let's transition to a complete different side, and then I want to kind of get your thoughts on the current times. Trump has publicly not been a fan of Bitcoin. Is that a fair assessment with Trump, where he stands with that?
Sure.
Okay. So now Trump has also got a method of the way he negotiates. He's a power player. He's somebody that'll freeze assets. He's somebody that'll put tariffs. He's somebody that push people around. He's somebody that, will play every single power play in the book of power plays, right? If he gets reelected and he wants to go through his power plays, and somebody can use through Bitcoin to transfer money, and there's not an ability to freeze assets, do you think a Trump getting reelected, is that a good thing or a bad thing for the cryptocurrency world, or is it irrelevant?
It's irrelevant in a lot of ways, because no government, as we've talked about, has the power to stop Bitcoin or any group of governments. The question comes up, what if governments, outlaw Bitcoin? What happens then? Nothing, because the Bitcoin is unconfiscatable, for one thing. It's uncensorable, and it's not going to be. Plus, all these government regulators and politicians are paid in fiat money, right? So, every revolution, what happens is the regulators and government officials end up becoming a fifth column, during the revolution, because they kind of sell out the revolution inside. And you're going to see that with any governments that try to go after Bitcoin. There's going to be plenty of people in that government who are going to be buying Bitcoin because they're being paid in fiat money, and the fiat money is collapsing. It's just the story of the Roman Empire, right? They try to pay their soldiers in ever diminishing amounts of silver until the soldiers started, working with the Vandals and the barbarians. This is going to be the same story, because Bitcoin is hard money and fiat money is not hard money. So that's just not a threat. It's not an attack vector. It's not a threat vector. Plus, we now have plenty of Bitcoin billionaires and multi-billionaires who have tremendous lobbying influence in Washington.
Such as?
And well, either direct billionaires or associated or affiliated with billionaires. So Peter Thiel, for example, is a billionaire. He's part of the PayPal mob, as they call it.
Mafia.
And so he's got tremendous influence. At least I know he did a couple of years ago. I believe he still does. Then you have just a lot of other folks in that circle that have, billions of dollars, and they have the ability to change laws. America is kind of one of the cheapest countries in the world in terms of graft. You can get a law changed in America for $100,000. I wish our senators were more corrupt, and that it would cost more to change laws or to create new laws, to tell you the truth. But they seem to be open to pretty nickel and diming. You can get a law changed in a heartbeat. This is why, the financial sector, they overturned every single regulation since 1933, 1934, the Securities Act. Well, because you took a Series 7 exam.
Mm-hmm.
So those laws. Every single thing in the Securities Law Act of 33 and 34 has been overturned by lobbyists from Wall Street in Washington. So now none of those protections exist anymore. And we have the situation that we have now, that they just try to meet every single problem by printing money. The money's being debased. It's backed by nothing, or as Paul Krugman of the New York Times says, the US dollar is backed by men with guns. Okay, great. Well, if you can't pay the men with guns anymore, what happens to your currency? It goes, hyperinflationary collapse to zero. This is the sad state of affairs. That fiat money is not going to breed a solid political economic class representing solid values that people are going to look up to. No, it's disintegrating before our eyes, Patrick. It's disintegrating before our eyes.
And I cannot believe the fact that people are okay with us constantly printing money, by the way. It's just pathetic to me that it just keeps happening over and over and over again. We keep talking about how quantitative easing is not the way to go, but we keep doing it over and over again the last, 15, 20 years.
Let me ask you a question. You're in the insurance business, okay? Mm-hmm. It all works on spreads.
Sure.
What if they go to negative interest rates? What happens to your industry?
You already know what happens to many insurance carriers. Many insurance carriers cannot be accepting more business if they go that route.
Okay. Well, why are they doing negative rates? Because they're bailing out corrupt banks.
No one's disputing that. It's pathetic.
Right. So why? Yeah. So I'm saying Bitcoin is get your 50,000 agents to start selling Bitcoin. Do your customers a favor. Turn it around. Let's turn it around, Patrick. I'm going to make you $1 billion. I've got two ways to make you $1 billion. Number one, put Bitcoin into the mix of products your agents are selling. Number one. Number two, I've got an idea for an insurance product that'll make you $1 billion. And I hope you remember me by giving me a commission when you cash that $1 billion check.
So let me ask you, if we know what direction fiat's going, and you have really, a couple different choices, right? Let's go back to gold standard, hypothetically. Okay, to go back to gold standard, it's going to be pretty ugly. You're going to have to get a lot of people to buy in. A country could do it, but other countries don't buy in. It's just a technical move to make to get the world to be comfortable with it. And then again, when America needs money, when we have to go off of gold standard. So if somebody's sitting there saying, you know what, look, I'm with you. I understand the fiat currency is backed by nothing. It's imaginary. I trust you. Just take care of me. I'll take care of you. It's fine. Wink, wink. What is the alternative to protect ourselves from this constant hyperinflation taking place? What are some of the alternatives? I know you're going to say Bitcoin, but what else are some other ways? Somebody that's also has the same fears of fiat currency. What are some things they can do?
Look, people are comfortable with gold to some degree, gold and silver. Then gold's made new all-time highs against every currency in the world, just about, except the dollar. So it's made huge moves in these countries that are collapsing. The fiat money is collapsing in a lot of countries right now. Silver obviously is in the same boat as gold. It's a store of wealth, and you have Bitcoin. the thing about some of these other traditional store of value or store of wealth, it's going to be a problem, like property, for example. Property, I would imagine you're going to start seeing property taxes, skyrocket, because all these government giveaways, they got to pay for it somehow. So we know taxes are going to go a lot higher, and property taxes are going to go a lot higher. So I think property is a bit of a problem. In the stock market, it's kind of interesting in that those companies that are really software based, where the scaling of those enterprises is just a matter of adding a server and you add another 5 million customers or what have you. I mean, that is going to still be an interesting model. So Square is interesting. I mentioned I mean, I'm not making a recommendation here. Okay. I'm not giving a financial advice, but a company like DocuSign, which is just, the digital, the digital signing of documents
we use them. We pay them a lot of money every month. Yeah,
exactly. Okay. They are a public company and they're growing like a weed. And as everyone is kind of camped out in their home, sheltered or whatever, business goes on, and you got to sign deals. And if you can't, and you don't go to the office to sign a deal, you do it on DocuSign. So that business is moving up. Companies like Shopify, which enables people to set up shop on Amazon, that's doing very well. A company like Elastic, which is the AI that a layer that runs under a lot of these software apps on the web, is a tremendous business. It's kind of a new business. These are kind of new businesses. And again, I'm not giving financial advice, and I'm not recommending these. I'm simply pointing out instances where even in a collapse of fiat money and a collapse of the economy, you could see still some growth in these types of relatively frictionless businesses. Again, with your business, not to be pick on Patrick, Bet David today, but you've got a lot of people that got to go out there and talk to other people, right? That the scaling of that business is different than a software business where you just plug in a server and now you've got another million users, right? It's an asymmetric battle.
I will tell you this though, for us, it's so amazing what this pandemic did. 90% of our sales were face-to-face, Max. 90% pre-pandemic was face-to-face. During the pandemic, last month, we sold 10,968 insurance policies. And I'm not talking about term or final expense. I'm talking real life insurance policies. It was the biggest month we ever had by 4,000 policies, and it was 90% done through Zoom. So it completely changed the game for us as a company, as an industry. Let me ask you a technical.
Well, that's great. That could be an interesting point, right? Because people are maybe hesitant about having a face-to-face meeting, but would do a Zoom call. So that.
By the way, we were not expecting this. Our investors were thinking we're going to lose 40%. They flat out told us, we're thinking you're going to lose 40%. I'm like, okay, let us see what we're going to be doing. And we made some adjustments. For somebody like I'm talking to a lot of different people on the Bitcoin side and the cryptocurrency side. I keep hearing blockchain. Everybody knows blockchain. Everybody keeps hearing about blockchain. But then you're hearing about Oracle. Then you're hearing about Chainlink, right? You keep hearing these three different words. Can you break down how they all work together and why it's important to start paying attention to Chainlink, with people saying that we're going to get to a point where, there's going to be technology linked to your car that's going to feed data to say how many speeding tickets you get, how fast you're driving, and that data can be used. What do those three things have to do with our everyday lives that we live in? Why should we know about it?
All right. So you remember when the internet broke in the mid-90s, and there was concern that it was too decentralized or it wasn't appropriate for corporations. So they developed the intranet.
Yep.
Right. So companies would have their individual company-wide internet, and they call it an intranet. And that's like blockchain, essentially. Anyone can start a blockchain, and it's a way to it's software, and it's a way to manage data. But has nothing to do with Bitcoin. Bitcoin uses a blockchain in the protocol, but in a decentralized way, using a proof of work algorithm that is unique and separate to Bitcoin. Anyone can use a blockchain. So if you're talking about, let's say, blockchain as a business tool, well, there are a number of businesses that rely on logistics and rely on them heavily. Obviously, like a FedEx or a UPS or Amazon, the synchronization of their supply chains can be improved with a blockchain, because blockchain would give you greater visibility into the synchronization of your supply chain, and do so using software in a relatively efficient, cost-effective way. Going forward, it's going to be obvious to more and more industries that using that type of technology is going to be beneficial. That kind of triggers another thought here, which is that the history of commerce in America, in a lot of ways, if you think about how software has transformed every industry in the world over the past 30 years, right? Now, the airline industry is really a software business. The car industry is really a software business. Every industry is reliant on software, really, today. That's where they get their margins, right? They don't get their margins out of stamping metal and sticking it together and selling a car. Really, the margins are in the ability to synchronize and distribute supply chains, and there's some efficiencies over that, and then that's how they kind of get their margins. So the only industry, really, or the only aspect of our business world going back 100 years or more, the last man standing was really money itself. Money had been kind of the same for more than 100 years. You go to the central bank, you stick in a bunch of cotton and ink and you print up some paper, or the central bank digitally will, they'll create digital money as they do. That's a relatively modern thing, but it had not undergone the transformation that software has transformed in every other industry, every other aspect of modern life, until Bitcoin. So Bitcoin essentially is that wave of software transformation that hit everything else. Money itself was kind of the last thing. And now it's been conquered. Now money has now been conquered. Essentially, it's now gone to Bitcoin. Is now money. So that's kind of another way to see what's happening historically and how it fits in to commerce. And I think also going forward, you're going to see a lot more micropayments involved in the economy. So instead of subscribing to a content where you're paying $80 or $90 a year for that content, you'll be paying a fraction of a penny per article that you read, et cetera. And by far the easiest way to do that, or the cheapest way, would be Bitcoin. I think Twitter is going to start allowing people to tip other people on Twitter using Bitcoin. So if you like a tweet of mine, you can give me 1/100th millionth of a Bitcoin, which is called a Satoshi. And you can tip me in this way, and this is done because of the efficiencies, the cost efficiencies of basically software as money. So that'll be a big change, and so that's where I think we're and I think COVID-19 and the lockdown and all the changes that we're seeing are just accelerating that change. It's really fascinating what you said about Zoom and your business, because all those people are now completely literate when it comes to using video software on their phone and using apps on their phone. And now they're going to go over to Robinhood app and they're going to start using Bitcoin. But people on Robinhood. Well, anyway, I don't want to get ahead of myself. So anyway, go ahead. So that's my answer. Yeah.
So again, just like you said, Bitcoin became a accidental money. I call it accidental currency. We accidentally became virtual, doing everything on Zoom. By the way, any thoughts on the Bill Gates patent on the cryptocurrency chip that he's working on? Do you have any feedback or thoughts on that, or opinion on that?
Well, it's again, it'd be centralized, right? It's only valuable to Microsoft if they centralize it. Therefore, it's not competition to Bitcoin. Because anything that's centralized wouldn't be competition. He's as I understand that patent, and it's kind of interesting because I own a patent, as I told you, on the virtual specialist technology, which is used in hundreds and hundreds of instances, primarily by banks to trade derivatives, because derivatives are virtual securities. And so my patent gives them a way to trade virtual securities with a digital currency. So that was sold to Cantor Fitzgerald in 2001, and then they licensed it out to banks around the world. And it's the backbone of the global derivatives industry, which is an interesting market, trading phantom securities, but that's another discussion. But with Bill Gates, as I understand it, the patent allows for energy collected from the human body to mine Bitcoin, essentially from using your own body's energy as an energy source, or mining a cryptocurrency, I should say. And so that is an interesting philosophical question, because it would mean that individuals would be not only self-sovereign, but they would be able to become economically sovereign simply by the conversion of the neurological activity in their brains, which would have some current, some electrical value, into a currency of some type. I think that's kind of what the patent says. So that
to the average man, that sounds crazy, by the way, Max. I mean, that sounds insanity.
Well, that's what the patent. Yeah. That's what, as I read the patent. But I mean, the whole idea of patents is that you're trying to, most patents don't really get realized, right? I mean, so people come up with lots of different ideas. When I created the virtual specialist patent, nobody thought that virtual currencies and virtual securities, nobody thought that was a good idea. Now, you can't imagine a world without them.
By the way, any feedback on the stable coin, the whole, Tether being the first stable coin? What are your thoughts on that?
It's a tool used in the industry to shuttle value around. It's just like a money market, essentially. And, it's just a part of the suite of stuff that goes on. It's not under itself.
I only ask because you see sometimes when they print more, a bunch of Tether, you see Bitcoin going up, and you're kind of seeing those two go together. Is there any effects, cause and effect, that we should know about the two?
With Tether, there is a lot of supply of demand. They create a lot of demand, let's say, with Tether, but the demand is coming from many different sources, and on any given day, you could point to any different one of these things as being the primary demand. I think right now the biggest demand for Bitcoin is coming probably from Barry Silbert over there at his company in New York City, which is he has a kind of an ETF that he trades, Grayscale. It's GBTC is the symbol, and I think he's buying up, depending on how you do the analysis, between 0.5% and 100% of all new Bitcoin coming into existence. He's buying them outright for his clients. So his institutional demand for Bitcoin is huge. So he's a huge driver right now of Bitcoin. I think Paul Tudor Jones in the hedge fund community is going to emerge as, I think at this time next year, Paul Tudor Jones will be kind of like the king of Bitcoin. I think he'll have more Bitcoin than the Winklevoss twins. He'll have more Bitcoin than anybody.
Real quick series of questions here. Who'll collapse first, U.S. or China? or neither?
They'll be coterminous.
Coterminous. Okay. 30 seconds. Max, who were you in high school? If I was in high school with you, 16 years old, who was Max?
I had my own TV show in high school. I was doing the exact same thing. I had our high school had a closed circuit television network, and I had my own TV show in high school. I'm exactly the same person.
Same person as you were at 16.
Exactly.
Will we ever have a third party president? Will we have a libertarian or independent president anytime soon?
I think the U.S. government will collapse first before we have any third party candidate.
How soon is the collapse, by the way? Your opinion?
It's tied to the U.S. dollar, and the U.S. dollar is toast. And that's being played out right now.
How are you processing everything that's going on right now with defunding the police, the riots, the protesting, the media, all that division that's taking place today in the U.S.?
It comes back to having values, having strong values. And I take a lot of strength from reading the classics, going back to Aristotle, Plato, Socrates, and reading classics, because it's not new. History repeats itself, and empires come and go. And this is the ancients have the wisdom, and you go back to their wisdom, and it becomes my wisdom. And you have to be circumspect and take a step back and have faith that the universe will provide. Right? The universe will provide. I don't need to meddle with the universe. The universe will carry on. I just need to listen and be part of it and know that it's going to work.
All good. Speed run. I'll give you a name. Tell me one word that comes to mind. I'll give you a word. I'll give you a name. Tell me one word that comes to mind. Satoshi Nakamoto.
Anonymous.
John McAfee.
Fraud.
Ron Paul.
Sincere.
Peter Schiff.
Misguided.
Donald Trump.
Disco.
What was that?
Disco.
Okay. Jamie Dimon.
Sociopath.
Putin.
Statesman.
Really? Okay. Jack Dorsey.
Visionary.
Zuckerberg.
Rich.
He is. David Solomon.
From Solomon Brothers?
Yeah.
No, I have no response.
Okay. Buffett.
Overrated.
Nassim Taleb.
Irascible.
Ray Dalio.
Overrated.
Bernie
Extremely
Sanders.
overrated.
Overrated. Okay. Bernie Sanders.
Maple syrup.
Maple syrup. Michael Burry.
From
Big Short.
yeah.
Whatever. Okay.
Not interesting.
Okay. Jerome Powell.
Quantitative knucklehead.
Steve Mnuchin.
Smooth operator.
And last but not least, Jared Kushner.
Lucky duck.
Lucky duck. Huh? Lucky duck. Max, it's been a pleasure having you on Valuetainment. Where can people find you?
Just pray and I appear.
You pray and you appear with your Bitcoin and your gold. I love that. We're going to put all the contact information below for guys to be able to find you. Max, once again, thank you so much for being a guest on Valuetainment.
Oh, my pleasure. Hope to do it again sometime. See you, Patrick.
This is by far the most in-depth interview I've done on the topic of blockchain, cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, and we went very deep. And I actually want to hear your thoughts, what you took away from this. But I would tell you this, if you enjoyed this interview, the complete opposite of this interview would be with Peter Schiff, who is a former economist, very similar to Max, but they have different opinions. So if you want to kind of hear the interview with Peter Schiff I did a few weeks ago, click over here to watch the interview. And if you've never subscribed to this channel, please do so. Thanks for watching, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.